Michigan's Secretary of State Jocylen Benson was recently on MSNBC, and she, as well as every other guest, I believe Neil Katyal as well, just knocked it out of the park with a message I really hope that centrist America hears, which is that we don't have eternity to press charges on the people that attempted to steal the election of 2020. Because 2024 is coming up, 2022 came and went, and some of them are in office now. And with 2024 coming up, frankly, it's not only dangerous, it is an embarrassment that this is still an unresolved issue. It must be resolved immediately. Here is Jocylen Benson on MSNBC.
And Mr. Secretary, why didn't you just quit and walk away?
Because I knew that we had followed the law and we had followed the Constitution. And I think sometimes moments require you to stand up and just take the shots when you're doing your job. And that's all we did. We just followed the law and we followed the Constitution. And at the end of the day, President Trump came up short.
That was Georgia's Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, on why he resisted the intense pressure we've been talking about that he felt and that was applied by the ex-president and his allies to manufacture evidence of.
For the record, of course I want him to rant and rave and make a bigger deal, but that was as straightforward as an answer as I could have realistically hoped for from him during that interview.
Election fraud, of which, of course, there was never any. Raffensperger was one of many state-level officials, most of them Republicans, many of them Republicans, in Georgia and across the battleground states who faced the wrath of Donald Trump and his allies as they sought to overturn the election through the courts, through state legislatures, and when all else failed, through the violent insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. Joining us now, someone who was on the receiving end of smears and attacks, Michigan Secretary of State Jocylen Benson. Neil and Katy are still here. Madam Secretary, I want to show something that you said about what this was like for you, because we're focusing on Raffensperger, but from the Trump side, this was a national effort.
Even the president himself had called on me to be arrested and tried for treason.
That is when I say that's some third world country stuff, let me specifically say that sounds just like the countries that the United States got coups started in. That is exactly the kind of language we hear from the countries that have been wrecked by U.S. interference. The irony that we are now dealing with it is not lost on lefties.
Potentially executed.
To hear that the president of the United States, when he loses the election in Michigan, decides that the way to deal with that is to accuse you of treason, to ask, isn't there some way to arrest her?
We should stop expecting that there is a bottom to the lengths that people will go to overturn legitimate election results and seize power in our country.
So, Madam Secretary, I seized on that for a couple of reasons. One, you endured a particularly brutal pressure campaign and threats outside your home and to your young family. But it also was directed by Trump. And I'm not ever clear on why he wasn't investigated aggressively after all this became known. He was tweeting his attacks against you, accusing you of treason for not overturning the results in Michigan. He was caught on tape threatening Raffensperger if he didn't find 11,740 or whatever it was votes in Georgia. What do you make of the fact?
Man, I can't help but tap in. I mean, granted, we haven't even heard from Benson yet, but the SOB was on tape. It's insane. It's absolutely insane that he wasn't arrested that day. If it was anybody else, let me try this again. If it was anybody who wasn't ridiculously powerful and they did a crime of that magnitude, you better believe they'd be arrested like that. And it shows you what a mockery of justice the United States Department of Justice truly is. That it's 2020 goddamn 3, and this guy's still walking around a free man. Pathetic.
Fact that we're back at the sort of eve of another prosecutor who looked into the conduct, and we don't know whether it'll go all the way up to Trump.
Well, look, I think the truth is the truth and the facts are the facts. And what you're seeing now is the more people look, as this grand jury has, at actually the truth and the evidence, they'll find first and foremost that the election was fair, legitimate, and the results an accurate reflection of the will of the people. And now moving forward, we need consequences for everyone. I mean, yes, there was one former president involved, but there were a lot of people involved in this effort that aided and abetted the cause. And so what I'm looking for are consequences up and down, from people who have lied in court, to people whose lies and misrepresentations of what happened in 2020 have led to real threats and consequences in our lives, as your last segment detailed, for election workers all around the country. We need to ensure there are consequences at the state and federal and local level for these challenges and attempts to overturn democracy, and know that if there are not, it will not end. And as we look into the barrel of a 2024 election cycle, now is the time where those consequences must be pursued. The law is clear. The Constitution is clear, as my colleague in Georgia said. And now we need to see the law enforced and consequences realized, or else we're going to keep facing these challenges again and again, and people are going to get hurt.
I could not have asked my Secretary of State to say it better. Reach its sister, yes. Now, you know what? 2 years ago was the time. 2 years ago was the time. But having failed that and every day between then and now, then yes, now is the time. We cannot wait any longer. There's a link in the description. Contact the Department of Justice. Just point him to this. My God. Yeah, our democracy is in danger, and it is being endangered currently by the Department of Justice. They are so weak. They are so much in a peon of American oligarchs that they cannot figure out what to do about this situation. Because it's like a kid who has walked up to the high dive, and there's a bunch of kids on the ladder below him. And that kid on the top of the high dive has made one decision, only one, which is they are not going to jump off. They told all their friends, I'm going to go do a giant cannonball. And now they're not up there debating cannonballs. They're not up there saying, maybe I'll just do a pencil dive and make sure I hit feet first instead of rump first. Nope. They've just decided they don't want to jump. That's the American Department of Justice. And they're trying to figure out how they can just discreetly walk back down that ladder. Unfortunately for them, there's a whole bunch of kids on the ladder waiting to go. That's a confused analogy. The point is, look, the point is they don't want to do the one thing that it is clear that they must do, that there is no other choice. If they are going to hold a badge and say they are law enforcement, then it is required that they enforce the law. We see an obvious breaking of the law, and we have a bunch of career Department of Justice officials whose careers have been built in a system wherein the golden rule is don't go after the rich, that are now faced with this conundrum. And they just can't figure out. They're sitting around, they're twiddling their thumbs. They're like, well, maybe if we give it another year, then people will forget about it. Maybe if we maybe if we really go after the Jan 6 rioters and make a huge deal about that, maybe if we can get one of them thrown in prison for 20 years, maybe then people will say, okay, they're doing their... No, we know who did it. We barely require a trial because most of the evidence, was public. It was done in front of cameras. We just need a judge to go, yep, okay, now I've officially watched that clip of the president saying, let's do a coup. Guilty. It's not a terribly difficult case. They're acting like they need to build this super intense. What the? If you can't get the behind-the-scenes effery, then get the effery that was just done out in person, out in public. It's real easy. In fact, it is what Glenn Kushner would call a press play case, as in you have the tape, you press play, you say, that's my case. The fact that they have not put one of these people in a courtroom with charges against them is despicable. And it's also dangerous. And we should not put up with it. I'll let Secretary Benson keep going.
Madam Secretary, what is the consequence of the Republicans' ability to memory hole the fact that the very same election they agree with Trump was rigged and stolen from him was the very same ballot that sent them back to Congress?
Now I can take that one. They're liars. They're liars. That's why they did that.
Yeah, it's quite an irony, and really speaks to the reality of these falsehoods, that they're actually, even if you just unpack a little bit of them, as you just did, they really don't hold up. You can't challenge an entire election for allegedly being somehow wrong or having problems, but only really have problems with one particular candidate in the ballot. So it varies, no matter how you look at it. There's no legitimacy to the arguments that the 2020 election results from members of Congress to the Senate to the presidency were anything other than an accurate reflection of the will of the people. And it's time for people to start acknowledging that, and it's time for the courts to start holding accountable those who have not only not acknowledged that, but have not acknowledged it to dire consequences for the people of our elections.
Let me just make it clear. Because the funny thing is, the farther left you go, the more sympathy, not agreement, but sympathy, you can get for the MAGA types, because they are not complicated. First of all, they don't know how any of this works. That is why they are MAGA, because evil politicians have preyed upon their ignorance. They're working hard to keep them ignorant as well. I give you Ron DeSantis. I give you book burnings. They know that ignorance is key. The Republicans know that ignorance is key to their electoral strategy. So the MAGA types have no idea how any of this works. They use a childlike system for determining right and wrong, which is to see if somebody gets in trouble for it. Of course they think they don't believe anything the left says, because to their untrained ears, it sounds exactly like the rhetoric their own side is saying. And every time they see their side lying, they think, well, imagine how much the left must be lying. Because the consequences for both are the same. There are no consequences for the lies the right tells. There must be. They have to see mother effers going to prison. Do you remember those wonderful, hopeful days following January 6th? Yeah, sad. Yeah, depressing. But what did it look like for just a minute? Do you remember? Because the GOP was real quiet. MAGA got real quiet all of a sudden. QAnon got real quiet. Or rather, Q followers got quiet. They thought someone was going to prison for sure. And then nothing happened. Nothing happened. And so people that don't follow these things, people that do follow them but don't understand them because they've been taught poorly and intentionally poorly, they saw that nobody went to prison. Now they say that the J6 rioters are political prisoners and are being used like pawns. They're partially right. Yeah, those people deserve to be in prison, but they're absolutely being used as scapegoats. It was clearly Merrick Garland's hope that we would go, yay, yay! He got a couple hundred people that are poor. Or not poor, let's be honest, they're small business owners. But he got a couple hundred people that are not filthy rich. That's what he wanted desperately for us to do. He was hoping we would continue being the dumb, passive cows we have always been. But those days are gone. At least the left has gotten media literate. At least the left has wisened up over the last, 8 years? Good. But that's a huge problem for Garland, because now he can't get away with giving a massive pass on things like this. Can you imagine what the investigations into Donald Trump would look like if there were no media coverage, if there wasn't the online jumping with both feet on this stuff? I'll tell you what, I remember what people said about Mike Pence when he was giving his J6 testimony. Or rather, excuse me, when the testimony about him was given in the January 6th committee. There was a couple of days in the national news where this guy was talked about like he was some kind of a hero. You could just see them building up Pence as a hero. Online lefties weren't having it. They tore into him like a bag of Lays and said this guy was just too scared to go along with the evil. Shortly thereafter, you had the reactions change from talking heads, and then you got reactions like what's coming up.
One of the things we know that Fani Willis scrutinized was the fake electors plot. They sought to carry that out in Michigan as well. We don't talk about that as much because it's pretty opaque to us in terms of where the investigations into those individuals and then the plot as a national effort stand. But just remind us what that looked like in Michigan.
Yeah, I think it's important to see that there were, people lined up to serve as what we call fake electors, to then be presented to Congress to be accepted as the representatives of the electoral vote of those states that actually don't represent the electoral vote or the vote that happened in Michigan and in many other states. But it was the action, it was sort of the tail end of a multifaceted effort.
Just to be clear, that's fraud. That right there. The fake electors, like what we call fake electors. That's like saying what we call bank robbers. Anybody who did that committed a crime, plain and simple.
To overturn the election results, particularly in battleground states that the former president lost. And so it began with blocking the certification of our elections at the local or state level. Those attempts were then intended to lead for the ability of a false slate of electors to be presented or adopted by state legislators and then presented to Congress and potentially accepted into the record by then Vice President Mike Pence. So it was a clear strategy that, frankly, we saw as it unfolded and we knew was the plan. And that's why, for us at the local level, ensuring that our elections were certified first and foremost, then ensuring that our state legislature certified or protected or didn't overturn those election results, then ensuring that the actual slate of electors made its way to Washington. All of that was our effort to defend against these nefarious efforts at every step of the way to enable Congress to potentially overturn a presidential election, which would, again, the end result that the false slate of electors were trying to enable.
Yeah, I'm doing the yelling that Jocylen Benson can't do on national television, apparently. All of what she just described, that was a chain of a crime. And it began actually with Trump sowing the seeds of doubt in the election before the election even began. I actually, January 6th testimony, he was told the election wasn't likely to go well for him. So well before, he didn't have confidence in himself winning. Well before the election even ran, he was sowing doubt in it. Then this punk, after the election, tried to send fake electors to 7 states. Fortunately, none of them successfully confused the process. But the purpose of them was to confuse the process, at a minimum, to confuse the process, to send the whole thing to the Supreme Court, which he had packed with his own appointees. That was the point. To take the election away from you, in other words, to nullify your vote. That's what this guy was trying to do. I don't feel that we need to wait for Trump to have the handcuffs put on him to charge the rest of these punks. I am glad that the Michigan Attorney General got off her butt and is going after him. Got sick of waiting for Merrick Garland. I'm going to give you a little spoiler about what you can do. We got 5 states where this happened, where nothing has happened, nothing is happening. There is no work being done on it. Get after your Attorney General if you're from one of those 5 states. I'll show you the states in a moment.
So, Neil,
And here's Neil Katyal telling you the truth about Pence, as alluded to earlier.
Scheme couldn't exist without Pence doing what Trump told us at speeches in Georgia ahead of the special election there, what he told us on Twitter, and what we know through testimony. He described even more colorfully with one of his favorite swear words on the phone with Mike Pence. Trump sits atop the fake elector plot because he was the one screaming from the rooftops at people to do it. He was calling people at the state level. I think it was the peak of COVID. He was inviting them to the White House, if I remember some of the contemporaneous reporting. I know Jack Smith is humming along now, but do you think we'll ever understand the delay in examining Trump's role as the architect of the fake electors plot?
If you mean the delay by the Justice Department, no. I think it's incomprehensible to me that it's taken so long. You know, I know we'll talk about this soon, but like subpoenaing Mark Meadows, it's taken, more than 2 years for the Justice Department to do that. And I understand there's a congressional investigation going on and the like, and you don't want wires to be crossed. But we've lost a lot of valuable time on something that's so central to our democracy.
I just want to be clear. This is playing on national cable television. If you all are watching my show, you are already the type of folks that get educated, and I appreciate you. But frankly, the vast majority of the nation doesn't pay very close attention to this kind of stuff, and they only get their news from corporate media. So to hear corporate media like this just coming out and saying it has been too long. That is wonderful. That is very good. And I would advise you to keep track of the links in this description so that you can provide them to some of your friends that only watch corporate media, such as this, and have questions about what they can do. What can they do? Oh boy. Contact the DOJ and tell them they're angry citizens and they don't feel that they are protected by their Department of Justice.
And, thank heavens for people like the secretary who, bravely stood up and did the right thing. And the Secretary of State in Georgia, Raffensperger, as you said, did the right thing when it really mattered. It's one of the interesting things about Trump world is that, people would just laugh off Trump. You'd be like, oh, yeah, he's denigrating Muslims or he's, blowing up climate or something like that. But nobody ever felt responsible to stop that. And when it came time for Raffensperger to make the call, he made the right call. When it came time for, amazing to me, Mike Pence to make the right call on January 6th, thanks to the advice of Judge Michael Ludig, Pence did the right thing. For
Listen to how he talks about Pence, and remember that in the initial reaction to the January 6th testimony about Pence, people on these kinds of channels were singing his praises, like, what a hero.
Once in his life, he was that broken clock that was actually right, and he stood up and did the right thing. Otherwise, democracy would have gone entirely off the rails. And that, to me, is kind of why the Justice Department should have been investigating this full throttle from the first minute that this happened, while this was still the Trump administration back January 6th and 7th, because, this is... it can't just be that because of a couple of brave individuals.
He's moving on to a different point. I just want to say what he said about Pence initially, or at least as I understood it, was this guy ain't no hero, but he did do the right thing on that day. But the clarification that, look, he stood by for a lot of this crap. He just wasn't willing to do a coup.
Crisis was averted. We can't have this happen again and rely on the officials to all do the right thing, and so the prosecution and the, getting to the bottom of what happened is so incredibly important.
Yeah, man. It can't be stressed enough how important it is that we get this done already. It is deeply concerning that we still have John Eastman walking around free. We still have Rudy Giuliani, a free man. We still have Donald Trump, a free man. Gulag, gulag, gulag. It's time. It is time. The waiting is dangerous. The delay is dangerous. Every single person in charge of putting this punk in prison is deferring their responsibility. They're hoping somebody else does it first. The buck has to stop somewhere. It would appear that we must insist. This right here is where the fake elector plots happened. Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, New Mexico, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Oh, and by the way, Washington, D.C. Georgia has an investigation into Trump right now, into election tampering. Michigan, God bless Dana Nessel, has an investigation. Where are you, New Mexico? Democrat Attorney General. Where are you, Nevada? Pennsylvania. Where's your state investigation? As Michigan demonstrates, there is nothing stopping a state investigation from running concurrently with a federal investigation. Nothing but tradition. All of those attorney generals will try to say that they don't want to interfere with a federal investigation. What federal investigation? What investigation? I don't see it. No law prohibits them from opening a state-level investigation. If it should be that everybody they were looking at happens to get caught by the federal investigation, they can close their state investigation. They can say, we have nothing further to add. But you know what would be more likely? What would be more likely is these state-level attorney generals are more familiar with the state-level crimes and therefore catch the state-level perpetrators. The people in your state's Republican Party that participated in this. Do you think Merrick Garland's going to get all of them in every state? Hell no. He hasn't been able to get one guy. The guy. He hasn't been able to get him yet. He's not going to get everyone who tried to take your vote. Use your power. Use the fact that you are their constituents. Contact your attorney general. Link to the individual attorney general's contact page is in the description. Contact them. Say, if you're in one of these states, say, I am your constituent and I demand a state investigation into who tried to nullify my vote. It has been, sir or ma'am, 3 years, or at least we are going into year 3. It's too long. 1 year should not have passed. We are now in 2023. This crime happened in November of 2020. Demand that that a state-level investigation be opened. If you are not from one of those states, if you are from one of those states, my God, write your Attorney General. If you are not from one of those states, write the Attorney General, Merrick Garland. Link also in the description. Tell him you are waiting, and not patiently. The idea that we should put any faith into these people is naive to the point of being dangerous.